Buying a home is a huge decision. Most people save money their entire lives to have the privilege of being a homeowner. So it is extremely irritating when someone attempts to dislodge you from your home and force you to live elsewhere. But some people are brave enough to stand up to developers, politicians, and their neighbors. Today, we're looking at stubborn homeowners who refuse to move out. A half-demolished apartment building stands in the middle of a newly built road thanks to a Chinese couple that refused to move in Wenling, in eastern China's Zhejiang province, on November 22, 2012. Lu Baozhen, 67, and his 65-year-old wife waged a 4-year battle to receive more compensation than was offered by the local government of Daiqi, a Chinese newspaper said. Though the act was admirable, people were very critical online, stating, "Look at this sad excuse for a house." Whether from external pressure or compensation, the couple finally agreed to sell their home. The village chief said the house was bulldozed on Saturday after its owners, duck farmer Lu Baozhen and his wife, agreed to accept compensation of 260,000 yuan. The couple had been the lone holdouts from a neighborhood that was demolished to make way for the main road heading to a newly built railway station on the outskirts of the city in Wenling, in Zhejiang province. Another example of these iconic Chinese nail houses. One lone resident in Suzhou, China, refused to move their home, despite a lucrative offer from a luxury housing developer. She has been living in the partially demolished home for nearly a year, even though the water and electricity supply were cut. The local government has demolished most of the 2-story block, but one apartment owner has refused to move. Now only a tiny sliver of building remains. The owner of the house didn't reach an agreement with the local authority about compensation for the demolition, and as the pressure mounts for her to move out of her home of 5 decades, this stubborn homeowner has only become more steadfast in her personal resolve. "I will not move from this house unless they take me out by force," says the ornery resident. On one side are the Chinese Communist Party, multimillionaire property developers, and the full force of globalization in the fastest growing city on earth. On the other, a house, a hole in the ground, and Yang Wu and his wife Wu Ping. For many years, despite court orders and offers of compensation, the restaurant owners were winning. Striking images of the modest building in the middle of a huge construction were spread on the internet and have made the couple national celebrities. Miss Wu was the only one of 281 families in the area who rejected an offer of a new house or financial compensation to move from the site in Chongqing in 2004. She and her husband stood firm as construction work began around them, although they had to move out when access to their property became difficult. The Chinese media have dubbed her the stubborn nail for her refusal to give up, but they have continued to refuse all requests to allow their home to be pulled down. They held strong for many years, but in 2007 they were offered an immense amount of money and finally agreed to move. The house was demolished soon afterward. An elderly widow named Vera Koking found herself with a very powerful enemy in the 1990s. That adversary was none other than future US President Donald Trump. Trump denied that he'd taken the property, but he defended the use of the legal power known as eminent domain to take property. But the truth is, he really did fight this woman in court in order to build a casino where her house stood. Regardless of your politics, Trump's battle with Atlantic City resident Vera Koking in the 1990s is not his brightest moment. Koking had lived in her home since the 1960s and had turned down another developer's $1 million offer for her house in the 1980s. Koking later told the New York Daily News Trump attempted to woo her at first. He'd come over to the house probably thinking, "If I butter her up now, I'll get her house for a good price." Once he gave me Neil Diamond tickets. I didn't even know who Neil Diamond was. In the end, Trump realized it was a lost cause and built the casino around her house. The house eventually sold at auction for $583,000. The buyer was a mystery at first, but eventually he was revealed. Trump rival Carl Icahn, owner of both the Tropicana and the Trump Taj Mahal in Atlantic City. This is another example of a brave holdout who refused to give in to external pressure from pushy developers. Mary Cook has lived in her house in Manhattan since 1913. She raised both her kids and grandkids in this house and lived here with her husband until he died tragically. Mary Cook remained in the house, sending her children off to college and entertaining for weddings and other social events. By 1915, the neighborhood was undergoing change, however. Stretches of brick and brownstone row houses, once the private homes of families like the Cooks, were being demolished by developers to be replaced by modern apartment buildings. Mary was approached with an offer to sell. She declined. In May 1932, newspapers announced the death of Mrs. Ferdinand Hunting Cook. Her remarkably surviving townhouse became the Uptown Gallery, run by Robert Ulrich Godsoe. To this day, the house remains surrounded on all sides by massive apartment complexes, giving the miniature building a look of a storybook. Many parents in Manhattan tell the story of Mrs. Cook as a tale of inspiration in the face of intimidation. Melbourne is a city with a reputation for cutting-edge culture and has some of the most unique architecture in Australia. So when a local family hired a Polish architect to design their home, he was surprised to learn that it was in the midst of a pre-existing apartment building. Somehow the couple had managed to purchase a plot of land that was already occupied by the complex. Through some sort of oversight, they were allowed to build their home here, though the architect was skeptical. It got worse. He showed me a catalog with some terrible examples of architecture, saying the house should look like this, said the Polish architect. Though he wasn't enamored with the design, he decided to take the job anyway, and the rest is history. Because the client was overly concerned about privacy, the house doesn't have windows in the sides in order to keep other neighbors from spying on them. The living areas and master suite are on the top level, as requested, while the ground floor accommodates the garage, gymnasium, and guest suite. Though it is in a pretty odd area, the owners are happy with their new family home. Back in the 1950s, a homeowner in Toronto refused to sell their unit in a duplex. Rather than build a house around the unit, the developer opted to cut the house in half, leaving a bizarre, incomplete home in its place. Built between 1890 and 1893, the street was originally blighted with poverty, but over the next 5 decades, developers bought up most of the structures, and the roads were given new names. Owners complained of the aggressive tactics used to obtain the properties, as one told the local newspaper he had received as many as 300 requests in a year. Little by little, each of the houses were demolished as owners gave in and sold. But one owner, the Valkos family at 54.5 St. Patrick, never did. Now the neighborhood has become much nicer, and the house is appreciated in value. It is worth more than $500,000, meaning that the owner was right to hold on to his meager chunk of land. In recent years, the house has become a tourist attraction, and as of 2013, the house was reported to be privately owned and vacant. Hopefully someone moves into this historic home sometime soon. Many people compare the story of Edith Macefield to that of David and Goliath. She lived in her tiny 600-square-foot house in Seattle for almost 100 years, and when developers knocked on her door in 2006, offering her millions for her tiny plot of land, she didn't even open the door. No amount of money could change her mind, so the developers proceeded with their plans to build a massive mall anyway. So the 5-story mall went up around her, literally walling in her home. Her new neighbors were a UPS store and a Ross department store. The area is no longer zoned for residential properties, despite the last stand of the tiny house. Pixar fans may recognize this quaint home, which was immortalized in the film Up. Now it is a huge draw for tourists and locals alike who have come to see Edith as an inspiring figure who sticks to her own morals instead of taking a paycheck. Though she tragically passed away in 2008, Seattle residents have rallied to maintain her home exactly as she would want it. There is now a music festival in Macefield's name, a drink at a nearby restaurant, and even a tattoo paying tribute to her. Salah Oudjani has owned a coffee shop in northern France for more than 40 years, so it's understandable that he would have a strong emotional attachment to the building. Born in Algeria, Oudjani moved to France in 1949 and had to work and save for almost 20 years before he could finally open his coffee shop with his beloved wife. This cafe is his life's work, so when developers offered him an immense amount of money to move out of his home, he flatly refused. "I told them I will die here," he says. "I don't need money. It goes too quickly. I will never move. This is my life, here. And this will be my life. Why go elsewhere when it's better here?" Since 2000, every other property in the area has been snapped up by developers who are building a multi-million-dollar housing complex in the area. His telephone, gas, and power are occasionally cut off, and garbage trucks don't even stop by his place anymore. But he keeps serving pints of beer and cups of coffee as if nothing happened. He hasn't got too many customers apart from some old regulars, but that doesn't seem to scare him at all. Though his business is dwindling, you have to admire his resolve and determination to stay in his place of work. Motorists in the Chinese city of Guangzhou may notice a strange collection of apartments out their window as they take a busy roundabout in downtown. That's because a group of 3 families refused to move their homes in order to accommodate the highway. Thus, authorities were forced to build the highway around this area. A demolition crew had already been hired to take the apartments down. All they needed were the signatures of the residents, who would be compensated for the loss of their home. They succeeded in convincing hundreds of families to move, but had no luck when they met with 3 stubborn families who understandably wanted to stay in their home of many years. The bizarre image of these flats, nicknamed nail houses, quickly went viral because they are visibly unpleasant places to live in, with constant busy traffic encircling your home. People on social media even joked that the homeowners had a scenic 360-degree view of the surrounding highway. Whether they made the right decision or not is a matter of personal opinion, but the building's owners have had a challenging time filling the other units in this strange instance of city planning gone wrong.